successes and the acts that must follow, both public and private, not only in the nation, but in the states and the counties and the towns and cities, were accomplished and will be accomplished by teams, not individuals. The civil rights activists with whom I and others who worked in that vineyard were surrounded, and no dinner at which I am present, no award which may be made to me would be complete without speaking of some of them. Some who are still with us, and some who have gone. The dinner tonight bears Hubert Humphrey's name, one of the sweetest and most able and most honorable men who ever occupied public office. And an award has already been made to Linda Boggs, I beg your pardon, to Linda Rauh for, in the name of her father, who was the president, had a great deal to do with what was accomplished. And history will give him his just reward for that and the war on poverty, which was a unique chapter. And in the Senate, on the Democratic side, aside from Hubert, the names of Mike Mansfield, the leader, Paul Douglas, Philip Hart, Joe Clark of Pennsylvania should be mentioned. And on my side of the aisle, Everett Dirksen, without whom there would have been no law, though he was very tough and very difficult. In the final analysis, he made it possible. And Clifford Case of New Jersey, now gone to his just reward. Tommy Geiko of California, who was then the whip. Leverett Saltonstall, a Brahmin from Massachusetts, are to be singled out. And as I am the only legislator present, I speak of John McCormick in the House, Emanuel Seller, Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, and Bill McCullough, a ranking member, and leading the fight from without were Clarence Mitchell, Roy Wilkins, predecessor, our chairman of the evening, Ben Hooks. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this ought to be a song with no applause, though you're human and you do applaud. But this is not one man's struggle. It's the struggle of the whole American people for moral vindication of our Constitution and of our soul and spirit. It is in that spirit that I am deeply grateful for your reception and your award. Thank you.
Thank you. Waiters, you may come forward now. Waiters. Very seldom does an audience be privileged to share in such an occasion as this. And I trust that it will live in our memories as long as we shall live. Thank you, Senator Jackson. While we're getting the other food on the table, and I want to apologize for stopping to proceed now, I want to make one or two announcements, and then we'll see where we are. I want to thank you for your attendance tonight. We had over 575, and this is the largest LCCR dinner that we've held. Let's give ourselves a hand. If I could sing, and I can't, I would sing happy birthday to one among us who has celebrated another milestone. Let's give a great hand to Dr. Arthur Fleming, whose birthday is today. I want to congratulate you. I have not had a birthday in 30 years. I've been celebrating that anniversary on my 20th for the last 50. The other message that I'd like to read, I'm reading it early. It should come later, but I'm reading it early to cover some of the time. Dear Joe, this is the Joe Rauh, of course. My warmest congratulations on your well-deserved receipt of the Hubert H. Humphrey Civil Rights Award. You have been the heart and the soul of the revolution in civil rights, the indispensable leader in many of our greatest victories, a true friend, a tireless champion of the Constitution, the driving force for a generation of progress by the leadership counts. So long as the banner of equal justice under law is honored anywhere in America, Americans everywhere will honor Joe Rauh for his courageous leadership in the cause we share. With affection and respect, Ted Kennedy. We will eat for a little while and then we'll start off again as time moves along. I might at this time, before we get too noisy, have at least a word, because I don't see him on the program, and so all of this noise has been a good time for him to speak. Let's give a great hand to Brad Lees and whatever you might have on his mind. We'll give this time. All right, thank you very much.
here because your autofocus is... I think it's just a matter of resolution. It's a little bit sharper. Probably would have to tighten up some. It's falling out of your
Oh, I see. Yeah, you did get it.
See, when you have it on autofocus, it'll people in front interfere with your autofocus.
I see. So this
But if
on
you leave it
manual.
on manual, then it'll be sharper because it won't have to, it'll just bypass everybody else and go where you want it to go.
Yeah, now it's perfectly clear.
If you can stop it down some. Well, I don't know if you got desktops on it.
On March 19, 1984, it was a different world. It was a poorer world. We had lost a giant. Harris Mitchell can only be spoken of in the singular. He was one, he was unique. He'll not be repeated. But he left us with a mission. Clarence left us with clear directives. And he taught us about life. He taught us how to be gracious, both in victory and in defeat. Clarence did not know the definition of the word lose. He did not know how to lose. He kept coming back. The Civil Rights Act, 1957. The Civil Rights Commission, 1961. The Civil Rights Act, 1964. The Voting Rights Act, 1965. The Housing Act, 1968. That's Clarence. That's Clarence. 1/4 of a century. Quiet, unassuming, and magnificent. We do ourselves proud to honor Clarence and his wife for their contributions to us. Chief Washington lobbyist for the association, for the NAACP for nearly 30 years. The NAACP has given us giants, men like Clarence and men like Rauh. We should not forget it. These are details, but details are important because had they not paid attention to details, we would not be where we are today. You think about him seeing the lynching in 1933 and then committing himself to a life serving others, his people and others, all people. Like almost platitudinous, but it's true, it was like an oak. Harris Mitchell was like an oak whose feet were firmly planted in a sense of social commitment and justice. In 1980, President Carter awarded him the Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor. You know, he was our chairman of the leadership conference. This is our first annual dinner without him. But he's among us, he's with us. And if he were sitting near me now, he would look at me and say, oh, he may stop all that falls wrong. That was Clarence. His family is here. His wife does us honor, and she is with us. In her own right, she is the first black woman to practice law in the state of Maryland. A fine family of 4 sons that Mrs. Mitchell deserves the pleasure of introducing, not me. How many of you knew Clarence had 6 honorary degrees? 6 honorary degrees. You would never know that Clarence had been so honored by others in so many ways, but people knew what Clarence was. And what he gave us will remain with us. The Supreme Court doesn't seem to understand by its decision today what the 1964 Civil Rights Act meant. But Clarence has taught us to persevere, and that we will. Senator Kennedy put in the congressional record a March 20, 1984 article from the Washington Post. The first sentence of that article read, Mr. Mitchell, who died in Baltimore Sunday night at the age of 73, was perhaps the leading public interest lobbyist of this time. I disagree with that sentence. With all due respect to all of the illustrious personages here assembled, I disagree with the perhaps he was. Let me read to you the plaque presented on June 12, 1984 by the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights in grateful recognition of the major contributions made by the late Clarence M. Mitchell Jr. to secure passage of the historic Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is to you, Juanita Jackson Mitchell. Is a very core expression of what you and Clarence have meant to us and what you have given to us. And after 46 years together that you had in marriage, all we can say to you is thank you.
Spirit lives on, and my husband is with us. It was just a few months ago that Clarence, it came over the air that Senator Javits was ill in Florida, and I, going through his papers, found a copy of the message that he wired to the hospital. And when I saw Senator Javits, I knew that the Spirit lives. Senator Javits, I used to sit in the lobby of in the gallery of the Senate and see him as he stood and fought in a district, my husband says, where there weren't as many colored people for him to be responsible to, but it was a moral fight for him. And this is what this whole effort is all about. Moral standards in our democracy. So I am happy to be here tonight because I believe my husband is with us. This is the first dinner I've been to year after year after year. I've been as in your losses and your victories and seen at you as you got your marching orders, and year after year you have fought for the liberation of our children. And I'm happy to be surrounded tonight with our children and their children and all of the children that they represent in this nation. I'm going to ask our son, State Senator Clarence Mitchell, who is also the third, who is also the president of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators. There are almost 400 black elected state legislators in our country now. You have helped make this possible. I'm going to ask Clarence to stand where he is. You should know that Clarence Mitchell IV, is he still here? Is Clarence IV still here? He has a construction job this summer, and he said, Grandma, I'll have to leave early if I'm to work tomorrow, because I'm sore. But Clarence Mitchell IV will be with us in San Francisco, where I will be a Mondale delegate, and where he and his father and some of the other Mitchells will be working to get the Democratic Party together and to march with Mondale to victory. Our second son is here, and he extended my mother's life, my father's life, and I would tell all the parents here, an investment in a physician's training is a good one. That's Dr. Kiefer Jackson Mitchell, the gastroenterologist from Baltimore. You should know that all of our children have been our friends and partners in this joint effort for their own liberation. They have understood that. And Kiefer integrated when the Brown decision came down in Baltimore, we'd already filed suit and the board capitulated, and Baltimore became the first city below the Mason and Dixon line to comply. And Kiefer integrated the PS 91, where there was an art curriculum, and the black schools had no art curriculums in those days. And his father, he was bothered by the white mothers and hair curlers who had a picket line over this little black boy integrating this large junior high school. And his father said, son, do you still want to go to school? He said, yes, Daddy. And his father donned the white mothers and hair curlers. It was a neighborhood of second generation foreign born, and they had signs saying, go back to Africa. We couldn't get the police to keep the crowd from jeering and throwing things at Kiefer as he was being escorted. So my husband donned a picket line. You know, he was tall, all of him, 6 feet 2 inches of him. And he donned a sign, double sign, one on the front and one on the back, and started a counter picket line in front of PS 91. And those signs said on the front, I am an American too. And on the back, this is my country too. And suddenly the police, who had been standing back and would not enforce order and left the kids on the store, in front of the stores on the corner, throw things and the like, suddenly they were galvanized into action at this one black man who started this counter picket line. And they enforced order so that our son could start the school integration in Baltimore. We're proud of you, Kiefer. And the third son is City Councilman Michael Mitchell, says if something's wrong, you don't sit down and complain. You just do something about it. And Mike, who is a lawyer, graduate of the University of Maryland, and was a prosecutor and is now practicing, has been elected to the City Council and is serving his third term in the Baltimore City Council. Michael, where are you? Our fourth son, baby son, is here, and that's George Davis Mitchell. George was a bailiff in the juvenile court, but he always liked to work with his hands, and now he's in the housing development business, and he is our businessman in the family. George, where are you? Will you stand? Now, that's just the four boys. I want you to know that my husband and I were children of the Great Depression. We couldn't be educated in the Baltimore State universities, and our parents had the wisdom to sacrifice to send us out of state to get what they call the first-class education. He went to the Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, and I went to the University of Pennsylvania. And when we came home in 1931 and 32, there were lynchings in Maryland, and he couldn't get jobs, and he took a job at the Afro-American as a newspaper reporter. He had trained at Lincoln to be a doctor. He had taken the science courses. But after he was sent to cover the aftermath of the George Onward lynching in 1933, and to cover the third Scottsboro trial in Alabama, he decided to give his life to doing something about this monstrous thing, as he called it, which separates human beings. And so that later he went with the Urban League. I went with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and I tell my children, I knew James Weldon Johnson, I knew Walter White, I knew Mary White Ovington, I knew Rabbi Stephen Wise, I knew, and if they think I'm a living history, as I tell them, of the people, the Spingarn brothers. One was Joel, who was a professor of literature at Columbia University, and Otto, who was an outstanding corporate lawyer, but who gave their lives to this ongoing effort to root out the things which keep us apart and prevent us from having the abundant life to which we're entitled in this democracy. And I tell them the stories of the marches against lynching in New York, and fortunately I have one picture left which shows me in 1936 with the youth of the NACP picketing on, we were marching with a picket line to urge the people, ongoers, the passers-by, to send telegrams to their New York senators for the passage of the Costigan-Wagner anti-lynching bill. And that was in 1936. So that we've been around quite a while. But our paths then converged, and I left the NACP in 38 to become his bride. We loved our children, we wanted them, we welcomed them, and we nurtured them, and it was my husband's great happiness that each of them caught the vision that we had caught in our youth, that nothing is impossible. Clarence was very devout. Not too many people knew that, but he showed it in his life. He never was mean. He was always charitable. In the losses, he was as strong as he was in the victories. And so that we knew that this day would come. And it is to our regret that so many who inspired us are not with us to see, and yet we think they do see what God has brought. And we want to get our children and their friends and our extended family, our sons that the Lord sent us. We had sons that he helped us produce ourselves. But then he sent sons and daughters from all areas of life to us. And we have nurtured them too in this holy cause. This is a holy cause. And we are all here tonight to thank you, the Leadership Conference, the NAACP, because I was born, they were born, our sons were practically born in NAACP meetings. But the NAACP, which had the vision always, because they came together as black and white citizens of goodwill who knew that this had to stop, and who developed this tremendous network of support from branches throughout the country, and then had the wisdom to understand that wherever we worked, in the smallest village to the largest city, there were citizens of other colors and creeds, of goodwill, who were waiting to help us. And we couldn't have won by ourselves, and we had the wisdom to form alliances with them. And that's what the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights is. This fellowship of the concerned, this fellowship of American citizens who believe that the constitutional promises could be realized. And we came, the Mitchell family from Baltimore, and to thank you for what you have made possible with God. When I started practicing law, we couldn't rent space in the downtown buildings. Black lawyers had to get the storefronts in the inner city neighborhoods for offices. But when Daddy retired in December of '38, Mike's law office is on the 37th floor of the St. Paul building across from the courthouse with a beautiful view of the harbor, and the boys put their funds together and equipped it with all new furniture so he wouldn't have to pay for it, and had his law office waiting for him to come in and join them. But that's just a simple example of the long distance we have come. And I just feel that we have to remind our children and ourselves that we have done a tremendous job. And we have come to thank you because you were willing for God to use you. You gave your talents. We have seen year after year after year how you have sacrificed because you believed in the American dream for all citizens. And I'm going to ask the entire Mitchell family that came over tonight, including the grandchildren and all of our other grandchildren, and all of our other sons and daughters, to stand. Will you stand wherever you are who came to pay tribute to this city? devoted to justice, equality, and human dignity. We promise and pledge to you tonight that we will work to keep the flames burning bright. My husband and I were fortunate to have good parents who taught us early the importance of the family and to love each other. As Professor Larry Gibson wrote, and I wanted you to see him, the memorial service program was a beautiful one. Larry, where are you? He's a professor at the University of Maryland Law School, one of the sons the Lord sent. As he points out, from the beginning we were taught the virtuous principles of cleanliness, hard work, industry, initiative, and respect for family, home, church, school, and for self. And later through the church, Clarence and I developed a deep appreciation for brotherhood in the family of man. Leadership Conference you have been for many years, a living, vital part of the Mitchell family, as my husband brought home to the dinner table the stories of your activities, your victories and losses, your faith and hopes. Through your dedicated hard work, you have opened closed doors, lifted the sights, and widened the horizons for our children and all the children of the nation. 2 years ago, before Jesse Jackson ever started to run for president, the headmaster of the Boys Latin School in Baltimore, where our grandson Keeper attends, showed Nanette and Keeper, his parents, the biographical sketch Keeper had written about himself. And in answer to the question, what is your greatest ambition? Keeper had written, to be President of the United States. Now, Keeper tells you, Richmond grandmother told me Sunday that Keeper, in explaining why he had set his goals high, said, Grandma, I've been politicking since I was 5 years of age. He reminds me of little Sandy Newman. I remember when he was 12. Is Sandy here tonight? Sandy was the little boy who ran all the errands with such verve and such willingness, and who followed our efforts in the leadership conference and through his parents, Win Newman, who just won that tremendous case out in Washington, made a real contribution. In our bereavement, our family has been walking together along the shores of memory. We have been trying to cope with the awful finality of his physical absence. From the old family trunk on the 3rd floor of our home, which the boys broke into many years ago to get at our love letters, I have gotten out a treasure trove. I found a treasure trove of the writings of Clarence when we were young. A Greek and Latin scholar at Lincoln University wrote the most beautiful letters. A love of poetry. He not only quoted messages from favorite poems, but he wrote the most beautiful poems to me. Our 3rd son, Michael, has found in a drawer in his desk some writings he had begun for Denton Watson on his working philosophy. Denton, are you here? Denton has been working on an official biography of Clarence. Is Denton here? Yeah. He talked about his activities through the years. Among them, Mike found a description of the leadership conference and his description of the fight for the 1964 Civil Rights Bill, which is a real treasure. I would like to close with my reading to you a part of Daddy's description of the 1964 fight and tribute to the Leadership Conference. I know it is Clarence speaking through Mike to you. Mike?
As Clarence Mitchell would have it, he would know that the mind can only absorb what the seat can endure. And keeping in that spirit, we will be moving along. But it's as if Clarence Mitchell Jr.'s spirit is with us that guided my hands to a location. When he talked about a brilliant young lawyer having left a clerk's position with a Supreme Court justice to dedicate his life and give his, as my father called it, his brain power to the struggle for human advancement. He said he was a young lawyer, very eloquent, Joseph Rauh, who he met his early days in Washington. And let me read this to you. It's very brief. In the muted majesty of the White House, one could not hear the chant of street demonstrators, nor the precise English of Roy Wilkins testifying at the witness table. It was not possible to see the tears in the eyes of Mrs. Medgar Evers, widowed all too young. There was not a hint of the cheerful bustle of 2,000 citizens from the Maryland chapter of the NAACP delegation, headed by Dr. Lillian Jackson and Mrs. Juanita J. Mitchell, en route to Washington for a day of lobbying. That these and countless other things had made this day possible. The President of the United States entered, all present rose to applaud, smiling and moving with his customary quick step. The President paused to shake a hand here and there, and when he reached me, I didn't say anything that would sound magnificent in a history book. I did say, "Thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership." Those words sound very ordinary, but they covered a series of events that turned the country right side up. Others have written about the dramatic occurrences outside of Washington that stirred the nation. Few have mentioned the day-to-day actions and efforts at the nation's capital. My story is about the people who work with the Congress and the White House. There are 86 organizations in the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. A representative of each of these formed the tram that worked in Washington. We met each Wednesday at 2 p.m. and exchanged information, partialed out assignments. And then going on, he said, in the struggle such as this, one can name many persons who are entitled to a lion's share of credit. I would like to begin with 3. They are Representative Emanuel Sella, Senator Hubert Humphrey, and Joseph L. Rauh, Jr. We really started working for passage of the bill long before it was put together in language. For example, Title IV was first drafted by Joseph Rauh. He also was the first person in Washington to suggest that we could get a public accommodations law passed in Congress. And moving on to the other members of Congress that he mentions, you, Senator Jacob Javits, when he sent me with the message to deliver to Western Union, to cheer you on, and he mentioned the floor fights, and then he said, as Senator Humphrey was returning to his office, after exposed to a particularly trying day, I would think of that story of Abraham Lincoln. Quote, here comes those same damn 3 fellows again. He would come into his office with a throng of admirers or newsmen just 2 steps behind him. The door would close mercifully, but there waiting for him would be Rauh, Mitchell, and very often Andrew by Miller, the AFL-CIO. And then as they celebrated the victory, in closing he said, over at the Congressional Hotel. The civil rights team was meeting in gay victory spirit. Someone put a champagne cocktail in my hand, but quickly exchanged it for a glass of tomato juice. We were all happy. I doubt very much that any other group of persons lobbying for a bill really liked each other as much as we. We had not been there very long before Joe, Vi, Andy, Marvin, Jack Conway, Arnie began making plans for the Senate. This was another quality of our team. We were never so impressed with the victory that they forgot to plan for the next fight. Clarence Mitchell's spirit would say, my friends, don't let the Supreme Court's decision today get us all down. It was Clarence Mitchell's abiding faith in this country and the Constitution and the power we as a people have, black and white, rich and poor, the disabled, blacks and Jews. And let me repeat that, and we must reaffirm with every breath our commitment to the preservation of that democracy in the Middle East and the alliance that blacks and Jews have played in the history of creating civil rights legislation and bringing this country forward. And I say to you, it was Clarence Mitchell who said that we've got to worry about the sight impaired and the hearing impaired and Japanese Americans whose property was taken from them. It was Clarence Mitchell who believed that a Ralph Nees had the legislative skill and genius to carry on the work of this great association. And Ralph Nees, I know Clarence Mitchell was smiling in heaven, knowing that every time a press release would come out, he would tell me, Michael, I know Ralph had that innate ability to continue the lobbying fight. And I saw Althea Simmons in the audience, who is well continuing the fight for the NAACP. I'm going to close, but Clarence Mitchell will want to let you know that we must be on guard against and repudiate those forces that destroy us and our country by causing us to lose faith in the power of just law. Whether it comes from a Ku Klux Klan meeting in a cow pasture or in a street meeting in Harlem, the voice that ridicules our Constitution, that demeans our Supreme Court, and discounts our civil rights laws is the sound of man's ancient enemy, ignorance. Let us move on into an enlightened age. God bless each and every one of you, and as we will close, may the rose rise with you, may the winds be forever at your back, and may God keep you in the hollow of her hand.
Coming to a close. But for the record, I simply have one question I want to ask Mrs. Mitchell. I know Mr. Jackson is working on a biography, and I know he's getting the cooperation of the Mitchell family. I simply want to know when he gets his hands on the other. The next award is to Amanda Bedell Wilkins, the wife of 51 years of Roy Wilkins. Roy Wilkins, the grandson of Mississippi slaves, served for 46 years with the association. He died September 8, Tuesday, 1981, at the age of 80 years old. He had served then for 22 years as executive director of the NAACP, having retired in 1977. You know, he went to the NAACP in 1931. He had come from being managing editor of the Kansas City Call. From 19 1934 to 49, he was editor of the Crisis. He guided the NAACP as its executive director during a time of growth and prestige and increased membership. He was administrator of the NAACP in 1954, having become the executive director in 55. But he was administrator in 54 when the NAACP played the central, pivotal role in the victory in Brown versus Board of Education. He was an organizer and supporter of the 1963 march, one of the key people in the march. You know, Rauh Wilkins was not one that you would see at a podium or at a microphone. He was one who had a quiet competence, who believed in thoroughness and in preparation. He understood power. Not everyone does. And he, rather than being at a microphone, you would find him in a boardroom or caucus room. You know, one of his favorite sayings was, well, the NAACP is in business to go out of business. Well, if that's the case, Roy, I quote the old Baptist hymnal, if we ever needed the NAACP before, we sure do need you now. Now, he contributed immensely to all of our civil rights victories that I earlier affixed Clarence's name to. I mean, things take a joint effort. It takes people working together and pulling in the same direction. The plaque reads, presented on June 12, 1984, by the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, in grateful recognition of the major contributions made by the late Rauh Wilkins to secure passage of the historic Civil Rights Act of 1964. The plaque has a reproduction on the front of the front page of the New York Times for June 20, 1964, with the headline, Civil Rights Bill Passes. The plaque, as was Clarence's, was created for this special tribute. It is with honor, pride, appreciation, and humility that we present this plaque to Amendment Rauh Wilkins. She is not with us this evening, but Aronson, also a founder of the Leadership Conference of Civil Rights, as was Rauh Wilkins, and who also Rauh Wilkins headed the conference when it began in 1950. Aronson is accepting the plaque on behalf of Mrs. Wilkinson, and at her request, since she's unable to be with us. Arnold has traveled, eaten, roomed, and worked with Rauh Wilkins for 40 years. I believe they call one another friends. Right.
Mrs. Wilkins wanted me to extend her regrets that her health didn't permit her to be with us tonight. And I'm very flattered that she asked me to accept this tribute to Roy in her behalf. If Roy had lived to accept this tribute himself, he would have voiced his thanks with his unfailing grace in the kind of flowing language that came so easily and so beautifully from his lips. And then he would have taken this plaque home and put it away in a box somewhere. Because as you can well understand, during his lifetime, Roy was the recipient of many plaques and scrolls and medallions, and honorary degrees. I think only Father Hesburgh received more honorary degrees than Roy. And the interesting thing was that there was no evidence of any of these, either in his home or in his office. It's not that he didn't appreciate them. He did. But Roy knew who he was, where he had come from, and where he was going. Secure in his own self-esteem, he had no need to surround himself with trophies in order to impress others or himself. If he were speaking to this leadership conference, which he helped initiate, give birth to, this coalition of some 167 national organizations representing differing faiths, differing races, differing ethnic groups, women, labor, handicapped, gays. I think that he might have begun his remarks with something that he said on a similar previous occasion. This is what he said. Our fraternity is the fraternity of man, not white or brown or yellow or black man, but man. Roy's vision was never bounded by parochial concerns. He would have been quite pleased, I'm sure, that we were commemorating the 20th anniversary of the '64 Civil Rights Act, the most comprehensive Civil Rights Act ever enacted. And I think that the first thing he would have done would have been to acknowledge that the other whom we are honoring here tonight, those whom we're fortunate enough to have had with us, Senator Javits and Joe Rauh, and those whose absence we mourn, Clarence Mitchell and President Johnson, he would have immediately acknowledged that these were the architects of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He would, of course, have made no mention of the indispensable leadership role which he played in that struggle. I think he probably would have recalled some of the events in the course of that long, drawn-out battle. The mass delegations, each day from a different state, that flooded the halls of Congress. The vigil that was organized by young seminarians, Protestant, Catholic, and Jews, in 4-hour shifts, who maintained a round-the-clock, 24-hour vigil in front of the Lincoln Memorial for all the 84 days of the filibuster. And certainly that never-to-be-forgotten moment in the crucial cloture fight, when Senator Claire Engel of California, who had suffered a stroke just a few weeks earlier, was wheeled into the Senate chamber on a stretcher, and unable to speak, he slowly lifted his hand and pointed to his eye to signify his affirmative vote. That was the kind of courage and determination that I think has been excelled only by Senator Jacob Javits. I think that Roy would have pointed to the progress that we've made, because there truly have been revolutionary changes during the past 20 years. What we have witnessed is what I like to call the Second American Revolution, the most far-reaching peaceful revolution in history. And that revolution was culminated with the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act that followed 1 year later. But having hailed progress, Roy certainly would have reminded us that the struggle for freedom and liberty is never finally won, that it must be fought for again and again, a lesson that has been impressed upon us so painfully during these past 3.5 years. And finally, he probably would have concluded, as he almost always did, and as I do now, with, let's get on with our business. The business that Roy, Clarence, and Senator Javits, President Johnson, and Joe Rauh did so much to advance. The business of establishing a more perfect union with liberty and justice for all. On behalf of Mrs. Wilkins, thanks so much for this tribute to Roy.
For those of you who are paying close attention to the podium, you are experiencing a change in the Master of Ceremonies. Ben had to leave to catch a train back to New York. He's got something he has to get back to in time for. Before I start with the final part of the program, I'd like to read a telegram that Bernie Aronson, son of Arnie Aronson, just handed me a couple of minutes ago. It's from a colleague of my former boss, Ed W. Brooke, and of course a close friend of Senator Javits. The telegram reads, "The battle for civil rights and equal rights in America is a glorious chapter in our history, but a chapter in a book that we have not yet finished writing. No organization has contributed more to that great struggle than the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. And no individuals deserve your awards more tonight than those champions of civil rights whom you honor. Lyndon Baines Johnson, Clarence Mitchell Jr., Roy Wilkins, Joe Rauh, and my friend and former colleague, Jack Javits. Let us commemorate their work by continuing the struggle. Let us pass the Civil Rights Act of 1984 and the Equal Rights Amendment. Together, we shall overcome." Signed by one of our most effective and eloquent champions in civil rights, Walter F. Mondale. And now I'd like to introduce one of the Leadership Conference's staunchest friends. He's the president of the Union of Operating Engineers and the treasurer of the Leadership Conference, Mr. J.C. Turner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I've been enjoying myself very much. I don't know why I have to go out and speak after all this beautiful program and all the very eloquent words which have been spoken. But I've been given the opportunity to make the top presentation of the evening, the Hubert Humphrey Award, to our good friend Joe Rauh. Joe and I first got together, in my recollection, in 45, 46, when we had the local UDA. And in 1947, we were co-delegates at the founding of the ADA here in Washington, of course, under the leadership of Hubert Humphrey. So tonight, it is to me a special privilege to present to an old and dear friend the highest honor of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, the Hubert H. Humphrey Civil Rights Award. The inscription on this year's award reads, "Presented to Joseph L. Rauh, Jr. by the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights for selfless and devoted service in the cause of equality, June 24, 1984. Neither those words nor any that I might add can adequately reflect the value of Joe Rauh's lifetime of unwavering devotion to the cause of civil rights. It's altogether proper that Joe received an honor named in the memory of that high-spirited champion of the civil rights cause, our old friend Hubert Humphrey. The two of them, Joe and Hubert, for the prime movers in the difficult struggle to place the civil rights plant in the Democratic Party's platform in 1984, and it was a tough fight. On their side, and willing to take on all comers, was a titan of human justice who was often himself cast in the role of the underdog, Harry Truman. Harry Truman may well have had that platform plant in mind, and he later said, and I quote, "To me, party platforms are contracts with the people." President Truman never flinched in his determination to carry out that controversial platform plank, which had been fashioned for Hubert Humphrey and the man we honor this evening. For Joe Rauh, this accomplishment of 1948 was only a beginning. As a Humphrey delegate to the 1960 National Convention, Joe led the fight for the adoption of the broad-based civil rights platform that became the guiding principle of the party. As General Counsel for the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, Joe teamed up with Clarence Mitchell, a man whose memory, as we know, rekindles our dedication to the cause we honor tonight, to lobby successfully for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, 1970 and 1975, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Largely because of their disdain for civil rights and civil liberties, Joe was in the forefront of the campaign to prevent two obnoxious Nixon nominees, Clement Haynsworth and Harold Carswell, from serving on the Supreme Court. Now, and for the same reason, he's expending his time, energy, and unlimited talent to preventing Edward Meese from dispersing the office of Attorney General of the United States. Time does not permit a complete account of all the victories scored by Joe Rauh in the cause of civil rights and civil liberties. Joe knows as well as anyone here that the fight for fairness, the struggle for economic, social, and political equality in America is far from won. I'm reminded of some words immortalized by a man who, strangely enough, was once Joe's boss, General Douglas MacArthur. Old soldiers never die, said he, they just fade away. Well, my friends, Joe Rauh is an old soldier only in the sense of his long battle for equality. But he remains steady in his convictions and determined in his body and soul to fight for the ultimate victory. Joe Rauh will not fade away. I've had the privilege to present many awards to many deserving people, but none, Joe, has given me greater honor or greater satisfaction than to present to you the Hubert H. Humphrey Civil Rights Award.
Before I try to say how much an award in the name of Hubert Humphrey means to me, I'd like to tell a story about my friend Jay Turner. It was at the 1964 Democratic National Convention when I was representing the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And the powers that be in the party never want a floor fight. That's the game. I knew it. But and the power of the whole administration was on all of the people on our side. And suddenly, the whole bargaining power was based on our having the ability to have a floor fight. And suddenly I realized that my own delegation was going. That the powers that be had persuaded them all to come up, and when I counted, Jay Turner and his two associates in the labor movement had the controlling votes. It was 3 in the morning and I went to sleep for 2 hours. I woke up Jay and I told him this. And I said, Jay, what are you going to do with all the pressure from the top to cave in on this? Jay looked at me from his bed. This is now about 5:30, quarter to 6, sleepy from his bed, and grumpily said, I gave you my word I was with you. What makes you wake me up? All I can say is that it gave us the bargaining power to go back and get the concessions that today make the conventions of the Democratic Party the fair and open things that they are. An award in Hubert Humphrey's name is very dear to me. It goes back, as Jay said, to 1948, when we fought for a minority civil rights blank. And as you all know, we tied civil rights to the masthead of the Democratic Party. We had the 64 law that we celebrate tonight. But as much as an award in Hubert's name means to me, this award is not for me. It's for all of us who worked on the 1964 law. It's for some who left us. It's for Clarence Mitchell, my gold dust twin. And for those of you who don't know what that means, Clarence and I were sitting in a gallery one day during one of these legislative fights. And in those days, Dutch Flenser had on it a white and a black, and under it said the Gold Dust Twins. And Harry Byrd, not the late Harry Byrd, the old Harry Byrd, who really ran the state of Virginia and really ran the Senate, he looked up in the gallery, Clarence and me sitting there alone and side by side, and he said, there they are, the Gold Dust Twins. That was the happiest moment of my life, to be treated as a Gold Dust Twin of Clarence Mitchell. But I accept this for Frank Bullhouse, who's gone, our wise and knowledgeable counselor. And I accept this for Andy B. Miller, labor's strong voice for civil rights that meant so much in the 64 fight. But I also accept it for many who are here tonight. Arnold Aronson, Marvin Kaplan, Kenny Young, Evie Dubrow, Jane O'Grady, Bill Taylor, Dave Brody. We were one team, one harmonious team. But above all, this award is for Rauh, my best friend for over 50 years, my wife for almost that long, a lady for whom no sacrifice was too great for a cause that was just. In 1964, the year witnessed a symphony of harmonious support for the law we celebrate tonight. In earlier days, Clarence and I stood outside of the committees that were considering the bill all alone. It was kind of lonesome out there. But after President Kennedy sent this bill up, and President Johnson supported it, when we got to the House Judiciary Committee that was going to look at this bill, 24 beautiful Episcopal ministers in full dress stood in front of that committee room. We were not alone after that time. But there was much more. This was a period of real symphonic harmony. Jews and blacks worked together without a ripple of tension. Labor and liberals worked in harness as one. Republicans and Democrats joined together. LBJ and Hubert on the one side, Senator Javits, of monumental courage tonight, as he was then. Yes, and as Senator Javits said, yes, and Everett Dirksen. This was what you would call the greatest put together of disparate spirits that we have ever seen in our history. It was a true coalition of conscience, and it produced 1964 law. The 64 law was the beginning of a legal revolution. Arnold used the word revolution, it's right. It was a legal revolution. It took a country where the law was for discrimination and segregation, and it turned that legal system into one that opposed segregation and discrimination. It heralded other laws. It heralded laws for women, for Hispanics, for all minorities, for the handicapped, for the aged. It was a true legal revolution that made this country greater. But a legal revolution does not produce instant practical equality. 300 years of discrimination, segregation, and slavery left massive inequality in its wake. The gates of opportunity opened in 1964, but everyone doesn't have an equal chance to walk through those gates. We must always remember that equal treatment of unequals is inherently unequal. The job, proud as we are of what we accomplished 20 years ago, is hardly half done. The road ahead will be rocky. There's affirmative action. Don't abandon that. Strengthen it. Today's decision of the Supreme Court weakens it, but our job is not to let that happen, but to strengthen it. Busing for equal educational opportunities is a necessity if we're going to have equal education in reality. We have to make our economic system work for those too long at the bottom. For myself, I see an America where everyone who wants to work shall have a job, where the health of each person shall be properly cared for, where each child shall be wanted and have an equal opportunity for a decent education, that no child shall go to bed at night hungry, where every vestige of discrimination on grounds of race, creed, color, sex, national origin, age, handicap, or sexual preference shall be eliminated. I truly believe the harmony and dedication of the coalition that gave us the 1964 Civil Rights Act can build such a society. Yes, I know there are peaks and valleys in the fight for decency in this country, and right now, I guess one could say, is kind of a valley where we are. But from the valley, one can see up and strive for the peak. That is the message of 1964. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Bringing to a close one of the most memorable and beautiful dinners the Leadership Conference has ever had. In closing, I want to express all of our appreciation for tonight's dinner. It was one of the most successful we've ever had. Thanks to you, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, the nation's legislative Rainbow Coalition is alive and doing well. Now, we will have the benediction by Reverend Edward Hales, National Vice President and President, D.C. Branch, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People.
Will you please stand for benediction? Go in peace. Remember the poor, the discouraged, downtrodden, those who still yearn to be free. Treat each other with love and affection. The Lord will bless you and keep you. He will cause his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. He will lift the light of his countenance upon each of you and give you peace forevermore. Amen.
were terrific. You always are terrific. And I tell
Thank you.
Don't do that like that. You always are terrific. I'm telling you, man. You know that?
This is Mike behind the camera.
Huh? Oh, is that Mike back there?
That's Mike.
Hey, Mike. Well, were you taking pictures all the time?
Right, I did the whole video.
That was a fine speech. Very fine speech. Very good.
Trying to put it together.
Yeah, I was telling your mother that. I wanted to